Yeah, I just can't see you
And
like
we're
this.
live. Hello, everyone. And today I have a very, very interesting guest today. As usual, I'm your host, Boshaga Mitrin. And today on the Shout Show, I'm excited to share with you our guest today, Miss Firdaus Nisha. And as usual, I will go into the process of deconstructing her experience and her professionalism, the work she's done, and as well as talk a little bit about her influence, some books she's read, and her journey so that we all can learn from her and perhaps develop even further into the future. Now, a little bit about Nisha. She's done quite a lot, and let me just begin a little bit. She's an aeronautical engineer from Bristol University, and she reskilled into an environmental educator. She has appeared on so many articles as well as created a lot of impact into the society, namely the Edge Markets on Ashoka Changemakers, where she emphasized on the importance of having connectedness, ethical consumption, as well as the power of collaborations. Nisha is also the co-founder
Mhm.
of Ecocentric Transitions, where she began that in 2011, where they work with corporate companies to deliver programs and projects to provide underprivileged community groups with educational programs, among many, many, many workshops, projects, and behind the scenes work. So today I'm hoping to learn a little bit about her. Perhaps, Nisha, we can begin with your early journey and how you got on to be where you are today. How are you and how are things on over there?
I'm good. It's getting a little bit hectic after the break because of MCO. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm currently in Johor Bahru, and I've just come from a project site in Tanjung Piai, which is the tip of the Asian continent.
No way.
Yeah.
I see. And was the project
Pardon?
is the project still ongoing?
So I've just come to do my baseline research, and I will be running the program probably in the next 2 months. So the idea is to look at what the community needs in terms of activating its environmental education, how to say, aspects to improve the way they are conducting tourism. So in this area, a lot of the tourism is dependent on the Singapore tourists and domestic tourists. um, but the thing is, they are not able to communicate the environmental importance of Tanjung Piai National Park because it is a very dedicated mangrove area. And close to them is the Pulau Kukup Mangrove Island, which is the second largest non-inhabited mangrove island in the world. And both these sites are Ramsar conservation sites.
Wow, I see. It's really important, and I'm glad to hear that. I was wondering maybe we could rewind time a little bit before we get into all of the environmental and on the
Mm-hmm.
impacts. I was wondering if you could rewind time a little bit back to when you were
Mm-hmm.
graduated as an aeronautical engineer at Bristol University, and then you reskilled into an environmental educator. How did that feel like? Could you
Right.
perhaps color in that experience in that beginning of your journey there?
Right. I would say it goes all the way back to my childhood because I grew up in a family where my father was a scout and my mother was a girl guide. And so they had really intensive outdoor experience. And so as children, we'd always gone out for, family vacation, expedition kind of stuff. And those kind of experiences as a child kind of provided a very rich space to learn, to appreciate nature and to find peace. And just being curious as a kid and experimenting with things. So that freedom in my childhood kind of was very contrasting with my career as a young professional in Malaysia coming back from abroad. And I think that contrast gave me that sense of, hey, for development we are going to let go of a lot of these environmental assets, and that was a very high cost, and I was not willing to sacrifice that without a fight. So that kind of spurred me and my partner Lyman, who's my co-founder, to start investigating how can we as young professionals live a more environmentally sustainable, high quality of life. So then we had to define what was sustainable, and we had to define what was high quality of life. And so this process of self evaluation and expectation management was something that it took us a couple of years to establish. And as we were going through that, we were also experimenting with talking to different people, observing different opportunities. So in the very beginning, we explored permaculture, we explored green energy. And so yeah, so it kind of like, it's from my childhood, then it became a contrast when I was working, and then we started learning more and more and more about stuff that we found to be what is our definition of sustainable and quality of life. Yeah.
Nice. Building on that quality of life there, was there any like particular event that spurred you like, hey, look, enough is enough. I'm going to do my part here. Was there something that really caused that change? Because I would imagine switching from one field to another is definitely quite a big thing, right?
Right. um Yes and no, because when you, I feel, because both I'm an engineer, Lyman's trained as an engineer, and for us, it's the thinking process, because you're looking at things in systems, you're looking at things as process improvement, and so if you take those mindsets and you put them into baking, or you put them into cleaning house, or you put them into sustainability, it's a transferable space of mind. So to look at
Mhm.
sustainability was for us a way to live ethically. So even the name that we came up with, Ecocentric Transitions, was because we felt to do stuff that was ecocentric was, although at that time a little bit against the grain, but we wanted to do it with fun and with adventure and transition, because we didn't know what the end game was. So we would kind of like do as much as we can within our capacity, because at that time and until now, a lot of people, they are very comfortable with buying eco products, which means you're outsourcing
Okay.
your conscience to a brand. And for us, sustainability is about the skill, it's about the community, it's about the collaboration, it's about even the soil, so sustainability is a lot deeper than just a product which comes from a particular place, or made with a particular ingredient. So sustainability
Right.
is a way of life, and that's kind of what we've been learning since we started this journey. Yeah.
Right. And with that, yourself and your partner founded Ecocentric Transitions, and then everything slowly fell into place. I would imagine,
Mm-hmm.
one idea into the next. Do you still remember your very first workshop, or your very first project that you pushed out?
I wouldn't say one idea fell into the next. I think it was a process of figuring out how we could make it financially sustainable as well. So financial sustainability is really important, because we are typically middle class, if not lower middle class. And so all our savings went into really time investigating different things. So we would do internships for like sustainability festivals. We would travel and live on a farm and figure out what is agriculture. We started with
Mm-hmm.
composting, so we make compost bins and sold them at like festivals, just to give us some return of investment, because we had gone and learned this from someone else. And then we
Mm-hmm.
did a little bit of consulting here and there, and then we realized that, hey, workshops was a good way of moving people into action or awareness. So then we kind of figured it out along the way. So it wasn't like there was a model that we could copy. It was very, very new.
Right.
And even the fact that people talk about social enterprise. Even that was very new to us. We still are figuring
Mm-hmm.
out how are we a social enterprise. So yeah, it's a process, and I think there's no blanket solution for it, and you just have to kind of build relationships and figure it out as you go along.
Right. So just jump right in and then tackle one fire at a time and slowly grow that way. I'm glad
Yeah,
you brought up about financial sustainability. I was going to get into that. Perhaps let's get into that right now. And
mm,
I know a couple, and I'm sure you know a lot more. Lots of people who tend to start up social startups face or they run into the issue of having insufficient funds, and that tends to cause their projects to die out.
yep,
So I'm sure you realize this early on, and to actually
right.
create a sustainable model because everything requires a huge amount of capital. So perhaps I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could walk us through how did you come up with a strong model, and perhaps share a couple of examples in how did that help to boost up for longevity of the project.
So in terms of models, we've tried several different ideas. Workshop was one, and the thing about models is you cannot be too in love with it because
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you find your swing, there's gonna be people who compete with you, people who offer the same things as you. So the idea is to not be too competitive, but we've pivoted somewhat in the last 8 years. Things that we did was we produced a card game. I don't know if you've seen this before. Rimba the
Yes,
card
the
game.
Rimba card game. Yes,
So
yes,
this was
yes.
something that we moved from services to products. Yeah, so services because we were traveling across the country. We were meeting communities. We were engaged with conservation groups. We knew sites that had very high needs with education. So we kind of connected it all together, and we managed to develop something that had a high value for all the partners that we had at the time. So it took me 2 years to develop the card game, but it allowed us to move from a service model into a products model, and it's the only product
Mm-hmm.
we've made so far, and we're quite happy with its reach because we get to serve like B40 communities. We get to serve conservation groups who are doing outreach and education. We're working with biodiversity, which is our a very dear topic to our hearts. And it is colorblind friendly, so it's accessible to more people than most games. So again, we wouldn't know, we didn't know when we started in 2010 that we would produce a card game. So it kind of it was a bit of um, a combination of sorts that kind of created this pathway for us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I want to talk a little bit more on the card
Mhm.
game because I find it really fascinating, and I understand while Ecocentric is doing a lot of
Mhm.
workshops, especially the recent one during Earth Day at Bukit Kiara,
Mhm.
where there was a lot of workshops and a lot of activities. Especially,
Yep.
I saw how the kids played with the Rimba card game, and you had like a couple of cards, and then they had to take like five from each,
Mhm.
and I understand it's not just that, and there's a lot more you can do with those cards. So, how was the idea formed? Was it like all
Yep.
of a sudden it came up one day? Hey, look, we're gonna make a card game. Let's put this into action.
So what happened was we looked at many different conservation organizations that looked
Mhm,
at deforestation, that looked at ecosystem services, that looked at animal conservation and rehabilitation, and we realized that there was a big gap with knowledge within the community. So some of them had issues with getting interns or volunteers. Other people had
mhm,
issues with just people understanding enough information about each of those animals or their food source. to identify that an area needs to be conserved. Like an area needs to be gazetted as a park. So what happened was we looked at the kind of animals that were under threat, and we looked at the land use change, which is part of the carbon footprint. How to say conversation. And we
Right.
realized that obviously deforestation is in the center of this whole thing, but you can't tie yourself to a tree and stop deforestation. The only way to do this is to mobilize a lot of people. And the only way to mobilize people ethically is for them to actually know the cost and not just, chant in the streets. You get what I mean? So the idea was to teach kids, instead of just M&S with the tapir and the sun bears
Right.
entering with sun bears, the idea was to create a baseline of 30 Malaysian animals. So they're all vertebrates, and that's what the name stands for: reptile, ikan,
Insect.
mamalia, burung, amphibia. So that's what REPTA stands for, the vertebrates. And as we looked at 30 animals, we also considered how would they play the game and what kind of information did we want them to have and who was them. So we defined the age group to be younger kids below maybe 13 as our main target audience, but it's playable with any age. Actually, um, we've had groups of people play them for how to say uh, oh my god, it's slipping me. When people get married, they
Yep.
tease the groom before they get the bride. So they've played
Mm-hmm,
this
mm-hmm.
and made this poor groom and his groomsmen guess the name of an animal just by description.
No way.
And we've had people, play two truths and a lie using the game.
Mm-hmm,
And it's
mm-hmm.
not even the part of the four games that we advertise for the for
Yes.
the cards. So because it's made to be open ended, people have interpreted it in so many interesting ways, and we're learning things every day about the game ourselves. So
uh,
it was really about teaching kids 30 Malaysian animals, hoping that they would teach their parents, hoping that they would play with their grandparents, because a lot of grandparents find it so easy to play with an analog game as opposed to a digital game. And we realized
yep.
that grandparents would tell stories about animals that they remember from folk tales or from where they lived when they were young. So there's a lot of value that came out of making the game about 30 Malaysian animals from across the country. So you've got like the Bornean pygmy elephant, you've got the Harimau Bintang Borneo, you have the Jukut, which is from Borneo as well, and then most of them are found in the peninsula. So the idea is to really pull the both sides of Malaysia together through the game and normalize this conversation about Malaysian animals. Yeah.
Nice. I think Ecocentric is one of the first to come up with a card game. I've never there might be, but I've never really noticed something that is pushing out into the market this way. So I'm incredibly happy. Usually you don't see such kinds of creativity, especially targeting towards the younger audience. Okay, so for our audience who's listening in right now, you guys can pick up the Rimba
Mhm.
card game. It's available on Kinokuniya, and and as well as lots more other sources, I believe.
Yep. So yeah, since we're talking about the game, I've got a sneak peek for you. We've got a new game coming out.
Oh wow,
It's
nice.
called Buru. And I this is my test deck. So that's one of the animals. So each of the this is Buru is about the food that they eat and the competitiveness of the animal. So each animal has an icon of food. So this guy's an insectivore. He's a herbivore. This guy's a frugivore. And let me pull a carnivore for you. Hang on. Where's my carnivore? Okay, so that's a carnivore. So, no, sorry, that's a frugivore as well. Where's my carnivore? Carnivores don't seem to be hanging out much. Hang on. Yeah, where are my carnivores? Okay, so he's a carnivore. Okay, so that's a
Nice.
carnivore. So you can see each of them have different food sources, and then there are food cards as well. So this is coming out, I hope, in the next couple of months. And yeah, you guys will see it if you follow us on Rimba the card game. So this is Buru. That's the new game for this year.
Nice. It's called Buru, is it?
It's not out yet.
I know.
Yes,
I was just
Buru means to hunt.
excited. Right, 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 right. To hunt. All right. So I'll definitely get the team to leave down links necessary, and I myself am thinking of getting one, and I hope I could get a good offer for the team here as well. All right, Nisha, I was wondering, let's switch
Sure,
gears a
sure.
little bit. I want to talk a little bit
Yes.
about scaling up and running works in the social entrepreneurship space. We've got a couple questions from our audience members here. Most of them have already started their
Okay.
social projects,
Yep.
but they're still in a very beginning stage, so to speak.
Yep.
So, number one on the questions chart is,
Mm-hmm.
how do you not get burnt out, and how do you limit the amount of time you work? Because as founders and a small team, generally you don't stop. You work non-stop
Yep.
day and night. So how do you prevent that burnout and keep going?
I think for me, because I work for about 8 to 10 years before I started out. So I had already been some trained. I used to work for Accenture, so I came from that background. So when Lyman and I decided to start Ecocentric, we had already come from a space where we understood reporting, we understood professionalism, we had a sense of we had a framework to function in. So we didn't come with fresh out of school. So we already had that scheduled time for working and stuff. But at the same time, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the vast amount of opportunity and just the amount of potential projects that you could jump on. And I think for us in the early years, it was um, considering how do we prioritize our skills and the opportunities that were coming by. Because sometimes everything sounds exciting, and then you realize if I really want to do good work, I have to pick what I'm best at or what I want to learn out of this project and dedicate time to that. And that's how you structure the way you spend your energy. And yes, there were times even now where we have like now post MCO, we're writing a whole lot of proposals to get work going again. And there are seasons, and once you understand these seasons come and go, you are a bit more prepared, because it's expectations management is not just about others, it's also about yourself, because you can't save the world, but you can be a part of very good projects. And so that's where we sit down as a team, because we share a lot of core values, and we decide what are the kind of projects we want to invest our time in. And even when the client slashes the budget, then we have to reevaluate how much do we push and how much do we retreat, or where do we cut our losses. And like I said, you can't be too in love with your idea. You have to understand that it's a service we are providing for somebody else, which means that person needs to also come towards you in the process. It's a meeting point of demand and service. And so that's kind of what I tell myself when I feel like, oh my god, why am I doing this again? Is this worth my effort? Am I not giving enough? Is the client just impossible to talk to? Then we have to really consciously step back. And one of the things that we've been very, very privileged to have is really good friends. So along the way, because of collaboration, because of shared values, because of the how to say, the idea of leveraging with other people in exchange of for time, for work, for ideas, we've got a really strong network of friends that we work with. And 10 years ago, we might have just been stalking them on Facebook. And today we can say that they are our friends, and we will either choose not to do certain work, and we'll just pass it on to them, or we just recommend them upfront. So when a client comes and says, can you do this and this and this, and we know that we don't want to do it, we'll tell them like,
Mhm.
we can't do this right now, but you could call this person and they would be able to respond to you. So we've passed on a lot of work, people have passed on a lot of work to us. So it kind of creates an ecosystem of people working together. So I think if you want to work sustainability and you don't want to go bonkers trying to get there, you have to realize that it's not something you can do alone. It's a ecosystem type job, and we
I
have lots of
see.
mentors. So I've got mentors who are I don't know, in the arts field. I've got mentors who are landscape architects. I've got mentors who are really amazing plant-based, experimentative cooks. So yeah, having a strong network of friends and colleagues is really important, and having mentors, because sometimes they've seen the pathway ahead, or they can project what is potentially going to happen. So listening and reflecting is really important, because not all advice is good advice. So you have to kind of like yeah, take a deep breath, manage your expectations and others, and yeah, enjoy the process.
I
If you don't
see.
enjoy what you're doing, in 10 years there's no difference of being an entrepreneur or working for someone you don't like. So
Gotcha.
every decision you make defines who you are. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Before we get in, I
If
want
only
to
I
get
knew this
into
10 years
the
ago.
I want to get into the mentors in just a sec. But before that, is there any set formula or like a framework that you use to choose? Okay, I'm gonna do this, and I'm not going to do these others. Is there like a what do you look on in a particular project or an idea that makes you feel like, look, let's put this as high priority. Let's do it.
Hmm. I guess that's the
That's
benefit
a
of
that's
being
a
your own
hard
boss.
that's a hard question, isn't
You
it?
decide what you want to work on. This is my MCO project. This is something I did over MCO. So I'm like psyched that it's like ready. This is my test set. So, I'm because we had nothing to do and we were playing with the idea of a new game, and I just didn't have the time, because it took me 3 years to make the first one. So I was thinking, oh my god, I've got to clear time so that even to compress it, it'll take me like a year to create a new game. And then MCO came along, and I was bored, and I was like,
Uh-huh.
okay, this could work. Yeah, I'm playing myself at home. So I don't
Mhm.
know. It's There's no formula. It is sometimes it's gut feel. Sometimes it's the right people talking to you at the right time. It's the universe making things happen. I don't know what the formula is. I'm not good with this kind of things. It cannot just happen.
Well,
Yeah.
you are an engineer, and I am too. So I guess formulas play a big part of that life. Oh wow! I guess every cloud has a silver lining. You just got to make the
Trust
best
me,
of
I'm
every
very
situation.
oriented. Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I'm very process orientated. So if I've done something before, I would be able to calibrate certain things, like, okay, I'm not gonna make these mistakes again. I'm gonna do it this way this
Mhm.
time, and if this happens, I'm gonna like make this decision. So I kind of have a bit. There's a learning process. It's a bit like AI. You're training your
Yeah, yeah,
intelligence in that sense.
yeah.
So yeah, so that could be the formula.
Nice, nice, nice. Earlier, you mentioned a little bit about mentors and to learn from them because they get to see the paths ahead. Could you maybe give a couple of examples of mentors that maybe you shadow, and maybe any books or any thoughts that you find particularly helpful in working through tough times?
I mean, so every time we talk about sustainability, the simple things that come up are like, development, land use,
Mhm.
conservation. water consumption. It's just, a lot of things around consumption, a lot of things around lifestyle, a lot of things around education. So I guess when we were looking for mentors, we would look for people who had very unique ideas. They may not be people in the industry recognized as unique or important, but they were unique or important in placemaking. And then we concluded, like, how does placemaking improve security in a neighborhood? Because the more people participate outdoors, the friendlier the neighborhood becomes, and therefore theft and negative social situations get reduced. So then, based on those queries, we looked at, like, because we were already doing gardening, we said, hey, gardening is a really good solution to reduce neighborhood insecurity. So it increases security. And then we realized that the neighborhood we lived in had the potential for a community edible garden. And then there was a group that was cycling, and then there were people who were jogging. So the more we saw these things, then we started participating with our residents association. And through participation in that, we felt our ownership of our backyard increase. And then we were involved in other things like, Taman Rimba Kiara. And like now we have Friends of Bukit Kiara, which are similar but different things. And so the more you invest your thought and your action into a place, the more you learn how to solve those problems, because each site have very specific problems. So how we became mentors was on trying to solve the problems that we were trying to address. So if we didn't understand how land use change was being done, we'd go talk to someone who was a part of land development, or developers who were friendly, or we would meet at forums and would ask questions, and we'll build relationships that way. And people would tell us that, oh, when they gazette land, this is what they do. When they de-gazette land, this is what they do. And so over time, we would build relationships with people in DBKL. Because, although they work for the department, they individually are very highly qualified people. So sometimes we see them as the council, but actually within the council, it's just a whole bunch of people. And once you get to know those individuals and you start learning the process, they become your mentors, whether it's a long-term relationship or a short-term relationship. As we progress in our career, we may be working with a different city council, and then we can contrast between the DBKL council and the MPSJ council and the Shah Alam council, for instance. And then we see points of similarity and points of differences, and then maybe we know a lot more about planning. And then we will kind of like triangulate our learning and problem solve through these different opportunities. So it's very hard to say that this mentor is the best mentor, because sometimes I get along with an individual and that person becomes my mentor, and other people don't get along with that individual. So they would be like, what? He's your mentor? And I'm like, yes, he's my mentor. So it's very hard to say the synergy between people. Like, I have a mentor who is a UNESCO advisor, and
Mhm.
she looks at community-based development and engagement, and it's in the art sector. And a lot of people find it really hard to take advice from her, even as a coach, and they're in direct coaching sessions. So I kind of have built my relationship to the point where I know what she's trying to say, and I also have a say in this conversation, and I would argue it out with her. But because she's a mature person, she engages you in that argument, and it allows you to grow beyond your petty thoughts. So I really appreciate those relationships. So having a mentor doesn't mean just listening, it means you have to
Mhm.
invest your time in arguing with them, because sometimes through this process of exchange, can you filter out the actual solution that you're gonna provide or drive or learn from. So it's not I would say being respectful is important, but also know that you're both adults. The relationship is an adult relationship, you're not their child. So you have a fair space to argue and negotiate your case. Yeah, and I think a lot of us get trapped in this, oh, I'm younger, therefore I can't pursue this aggressive conversation. But hey, if you can't argue with your mentor, who the hell are you going to argue with in the end? You know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's my mentor relationship.
nice. You can't really argue with your own team, right? Then you'll be back to where you started.
Yeah.
So, in a nutshell, kind of start, figure out the problem, and then implement, and then figure out what you need extra help with, and find the best person there. Talk to them, challenge them perhaps, and use their solutions into the actual development. Was there any particularly interesting, heated conversations like between you and
So
your
that's the
mentor? And
oh wow, too many to count. Heated conversations. Yeah, like okay, for example, right? So when I came up with Rimba, so for instance, this is a Rimba card. My mentor told me that in Malaysia, people who play cards are only playing for betting. So it was a very negative situation to bring play cards into school. And I was arguing with her that the cards do not have numbers. And because they don't have numbers, they cannot be used to bet. So then I was trying to explain that the cards are really about the animal image and about the name, and then the information comes separately. So the information will give you the scientific name, the IUCN ranking, the Bahasa Malaysia description, and the English description. And she just kept on saying, no, cards are really like for gambling, and this is like a culture, and you're in Malaysia, and you have to accept the culture. Then I'm like, no, this is Malaysia in 2020. People play Uno, people play, what's that? What deal? Um, Monopoly deal, and people play Pokemon, and they play so many other things. And I have
that's
no
right.
numbers on the cards. So yeah, so it took me a while to convince her that this is a potentially good experiment. But what she made me do that I wasn't prepared to do was she made me hold several focus groups to test how kids will respond to the game. So I was only testing with a very niche group of kids because I was super comfortable with them and they were comfortable with me, and it was almost like we had the same mind when we came to the game. So when she challenged me to have focus group play sessions with different kids that I had never met before or had never played the game before or never knew, so she gave me a set of criteria of things that I should try, and I just did it because I wanted to prove to her that the game would work. So I set up these meetings, I set up the schools and the kids and all these parameters that I had discussed with her. And we played, and I was happy to report back that, hey, you know what? The kids loved it. The parents did not complain that it was a betting game. These were the
Mm,
kind of feedback that we got from it. Kids ran away with our cards. They wouldn't give it to us. So it was an indicator that kids really enjoyed it and they liked the Malaysian animals that they were learning about. And so when we moved to the next stage of formalizing the design, I was not worried at all about the adoption of the game in society because I think the worst person I had to confront, I had already confronted, which like my mentor, I love her more than I hate her, so it was a good conversation.
I bet she definitely looked back at
Yeah.
that experience, and it definitely changed the way she thinks about cards now, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay,
It,
Nisha.
it's very interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
It's very interesting because your point of view is your point of view, and different people perceive what you're doing very differently. So it trains you in the way you communicate your stuff as well. So although I didn't go for communication mentorship, I got
Mm.
communication mentorship. you know? So yeah, that's part of the process.
All right. I was just thinking earlier on, how sometimes we come up with ideas, and it turns out that the best validator is the market, is the people. It's not us or anyone in particular, their particular opinion, but to give it away to people and see how they react to it. And I think that definitely will bring a lot of value to all of
Yep.
those who are creating their own projects. Okay, we seem to be, slowly running out of time. This is such an interesting conversation. I was hoping if I could slip
Yeah.
in one more question, perhaps. I really want to know a lot more about your experience. One thing someone asked me is, when you mentioned about gardens, and Ecocentric does incredible work, and I'm excited for that. I wanted to ask a little bit on, like, in the future, do you see somewhere where, perhaps Ecocentric creates a garden, and the people takes care of the garden, and then the goods, the tomatoes, the potatoes get sold? Is that like a particular model that you want to implement? Or how would the future run in terms of sustainability?
Right. So edible gardening is not an easy endeavor because we live in a climate where the weather can be very harsh. It can be extremely hot, it can be extremely wet, it can rain really heavily, and all the flowers that will fall, fruits will fall off. So, doing an edible garden is a challenge because the amount of labor that goes into maintaining these crops is really high. We've done this experiment, we've participated in many different models of it, and I think at this point now, I feel community should really invest in growing fruits that we can share, because the maintenance is not as intensive as growing an edible garden with vegetables. So I think fruit trees is the way to go. And have your own little garden in your own house, whether it's in pots or it's, how to say, on your balcony. That's way more sustainable than to, work in a shared open space garden. Because if you have open space, you should be growing, trees and fruit trees and that kind of stuff. And I would say invest in your local farmer, participate in buying from local sources where farmers are able to sustain and get a good value of payment for the vegetables that they produce for you. So I think when we talk about sustainability, we need to understand that you cannot do this alone. It is impossible to be an island. We are a very social. Human beings are very social. So the way we eat is very social. So the way we eat is very social. So the way we eat is very social. So where the resources come from, where the resources come from, we need and reinvest in them and buying from them at a good price. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Wow. Just hearing you, I can already sense that happiness in doing what you're doing, and as well as your team in creating so much of change in the community. Nisha, I want to ask, it just popped in my head, what makes you happy? What drives you to do this?
What makes me happy? Wow, that's like the golden ticket. I don't know. I guess
Absolutely.
I really enjoy I really enjoy the adventure of things. I really enjoy the explorative aspect of the work that we do because some models exist and we replicate. Once we're successful at replicating it, where it gets boring. So we're always looking at scaling the idea or providing that to a community that really, really needs it. So, for example, when we started with community edible gardens, it scaled into edible gardens for children's homes. And then it scaled into school based modules where a school would go through a garden program for 8 months. And we did this with the foundation. And we did this for 3 years in a row in three different states. So in each state, we work with schools. So we ran that model successfully. We can replicate it, we can scale it, we can parcel bits of it off to the Ministry of Agriculture. So it was a collaboration between a foundation, um, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Department of Environment in the state. So just establishing those relationships took some time, but once the synergy was struck, it was really very fulfilling to run those programs for the 3 years that we had funding for. And so now we are trying to scale it up in a different way, but we haven't found the funding partner yet. And so we're still looking. But we've learned so much from that, and that has been documented in our reports. And if anybody came and hello, we would support them in reaching out to different states that we have not covered ourselves. And so I feel what makes me happy is the ability to have how to say, I can make an assumption, I can test my assumption, and I can execute something and learn new things from the insights of that process. So it's a very scientist kind of mindset where you are experimenting and finding the best formula. And then once you've got that, you want to keep replicating it so that you can create a mass application of that idea. And so yeah, that I think that gives me a lot of happiness to know that what we've worked on is actually bringing benefit to other people. So the fact that, like, for Rimba, for instance, the fact that kids really love it and they keep playing it and they're telling other people about it, and we could then go on to set up our online classroom for the Rimba card game, like Rakan Rimba. It was a lot of fun for us, during MCO, to create like 4 weeks worth of content. We were dying. We were really dying. It was really difficult to write scripts and pull together the videos and put it up on Facebook Live. And every day we were like, oh my god, it's like half an hour, online because the rendering was not complete. But we learned a lot in that process, and you can't unlearn these things. So the next thing we do is going to be better than what we did the first, because we've done all the learning and we can advise other people who want to, explore what we've done. So I think that's what makes me happy, that whole process of trying and learning and coming up with like something that we can replicate and improve upon. So yeah, I really enjoy what I do.
I'm so glad to hear that, and super inspired. The fact that you don't just stop at one thing, but you constantly improve it, try to create impact and that sense of fulfillment within you. Uh, wow.
Yeah.
Towards the end of our time here. Time indeed flies so fast. So perhaps just before that, is there anything else that you wish to add on for our audience here that they can take home as a final message?
I guess, yeah, I guess if you're really interested to pursue something, do it wholeheartedly. Find people who can support you, not financially. It could be emotionally. It could be, having friends that you can say, hey, I think I totally screwed up and I know how to get out of it, and people come to your aid. But building those relationships is very important. And I feel the other thing is that you must always have faith in your idea, because sometimes, but having faith in your idea also means don't hold on to it until you strangle it. So you need to
Right.
understand that some ideas are amazing and some ideas not so amazing. So you need to know when to let go of an idea and when to pursue an idea. So like when we did the card game, or when we hosted Unschool in Kuching, a lot of people went like, why would you do an international sustainability program in Kuching? Who's coming to Kuching? And
Mm,
by the time we closed registrations, like 16 people from around the world and 3 Malaysians. And we were pretty impressed. One of those three Malaysians came from, is Hani, who you know.
yes.
Another Sarawakian who works for the Ministry of, who worked for Mestec at the time. And then another person who was from the Jeffrey Sachs program. So, we
Mhm.
were super psyched that we had such candidates, local candidates, and we had a group of international candidates. And Kuching turned out really, really well for us. And I think um, from doubt to implementation to the after effect of the whole program, you know, looking back, it worked really well. So sometimes you just have to know when to hold on to it and when to let go. So yeah, having good friends is very important.
Fantastic, fantastic. And what a way to end the message there. Really love that. for our audience here, that was Miss Firdaus Nisha, and the co-founder of Ecocentric Transitions, among all of the other insane, crazy projects that she has done. And Nisha, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure our audience really appreciate it and gain a lot of value. We'll definitely link down all of the necessary links to Ecocentric as well as to yourself, perhaps if others wish to engage further on with your work. So mhm, I'd like to add on, perhaps a quote by Mark Twain to all of our audience here. It came to my mind when you mentioned about constantly creating new things and to never give up. A quote by Mark Twain said, "Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect, and that is how you actually create change." So, with that, that ends today's episode, and I will catch all of you guys in the next one. And thank you. Have a great day.